This is going to be about Ellen G. White, but it's going to be about my experiences growing up. When I was young, I seen a tyrannical God. Do this, do that, do this, do that. And then one day, Jesus came and lived, and he showed that he's full of love. The kids came, sit on his lap, he told them stories. Everybody wanted to be around him. Then I realized that when you go back to the Old Testament, this is Christ dealing with his children. And when you deal with your children, you bless them and you have to discipline them. Well, when I grew up also with Ellen G. White, I was told many times, well, Ellen G. White says you have to do this. Ellen G. White said you have to do that. And it was just like sternness put a distance there. Well, in 1982, after listening to some audio tapes by J.R. Hoffman, I fell in love with Jesus Christ. My sister sent me a book recently called Walking with Ellen White by George Knight. Now, I was going to bring it, but it's sitting by my computer at home once again. When I grew up, I always thought that the Bible was here. Ellen G. White is supposed to illuminate the things that's in there. But I found many times that because we have called her a prophet, we put her writings up here so you don't see much illumination. And then all the time, it would come up here. And no, it doesn't do that. Yes, it does. So this here is going to be from that book, Walking with Ellen White, and it's going to be about her being a mother, her being a husband, her having neighbors and friends and stuff like that. You'll hear stuff today from her children, her daughter-in-law, that you will never have heard of before. But first, let's go in who she was. If she was so clear on her prophetic calling, you may be thinking, why didn't she not claim the title of a prophet? On October 3, 1904, this was towards the ending of her messages, Ellen White commented before 2,500 people in Battle Creek that she did not claim to be a prophetess. The Battle Creek newspapers trumpeted the news of the woman whom the Adventists had believed was a prophet was not, by her own words. This at the time stirred up a very large controversy because a lot of the people referred to her as being a prophet. Some say, why is this? I have had no claims to make, only that I am instructed that I am the Lord's messenger and that he called me in my youth to be his messenger, to receive his words and to give a clear and decided message in the name of the Lord Jesus. So her message was not about her being a prophet. It was all about Jesus. I have ever responded, I am the Lord's messenger. I know that many have called me a prophet, but I have made no claim to the title. On the other hand, she noted, if others call me by that name, I have no controversy with them. And this comes from First Selected Messages. Why have I not claimed to be a prophet? To the query, she provided her readers with two main reasons. Because in these days, many who boldly claim that they are prophets are a reproach to the cause of God, or to the cause of Christ. And number two, because my work includes much more than the word prophet signifies. In another place, she said, my commission embraces the work of a prophet, but it does not end there. How many have seen the transcripts from the 1919 seminar? I see one of them. What do we do with Ellen G. White? Well, let's make her a prophet. And I personally know a couple people that are not Seventh-day Adventists because we call her a prophet. And that is sad. When referring to writing in the Great Controversy, she noted that she was often conscious of the presence of the angels of God. She also said that the Holy Spirit traced these truths upon the hearts and minds as indelibly as a law was traced by the finger of God upon the tables of stone. Talking about the presence of angels being there when she was writing a great controversy, it reminds me of a text in Hebrews 13:2. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. And I know Ron Wyatt talked about that in some of it. There's a thing on the internet that I think it's 3.5 hours. And he talked about an angel. I know one experience, he talked about an angel that he had experience with. When he was over there, there was a person he did not want to do the work that he was doing with. And so he did other work. And one of the young men there says, come and speak at our group on Thursday night. And he said, sure. Gave him directions. He went and got lost. So he says, I'm going back to the David Motel. And on the way back, he's seen this guy, old man, wandering all over. He says it looked like he was drunk. So he stopped and picked him up. And the guy says, well, Ron says, show me where you want to go. And so he says, turn here and turn here. And he says, you can let me out here. After he got back, he leaned in the window and says, Ron, the meeting down there is on that house down the road. Ron got it. The guy was gone. We never know who we meet that might be angels. I am commissioned to receive and communicate his messages. I am not to appear before the people as holding any other position than that of a messenger with a message. And this is some of the reasons that I call her not a prophet, but God's messenger for the God's or Christ's end-time church. Because if you go through her writings and you look at the things that she has written about that we need to do to prepare for the time of the trouble, some of that stuff we don't get out of the Bible. Besides the books that she wrote, she provided material for 5,000 articles and more than 8,000 letters. By 1985, she had crossed the United States from California to the east by train 24 times. And the train had only been in existence in 1885, only 16 years. So she was very active. People seem to want prophets to be more than human, but this wasn't so. Mrs. M.J. Nelson tells of her first day as a housekeeper for Ellen White, and this goes from people with their personal experience with Ellen White. Mrs. White took the opportunity to help Mrs. Nelson not to expect too much. Sister Nelson, she said, you have come into my home. You are to be a member of my family. You will see some things in me that you do not approve of. You may see things in my son Willie that you do not approve of. I may make mistakes, and my son Willie may make mistakes. I may be lost at last, but my son Willie may be lost. Mrs. White then went on to encourage her to remain faithful to God and his church in spite of my imperfections. She might see the White household. This was an interview in 1930 by M.J. Nelson. I never heard of anything like that when I was a child because things Ellen G. White did was perfect. Ellen White, like many biblical prophets, was human beings, and like them, she had her problems. And eventually I'll get into some humorous things that happened to her. I want a humble heart, a meek and quiet spirit. I wish that self should be hid in Jesus. I wish self to be crucified. I do not claim infallibility or even perfection of Christian character. I am not free from mistakes and errors of my life. Had I followed my Savior most closely, I should not have to mourn so much my unlikeness to his dear image. And I thought she walked right, everything was right down the line with Christ. About her mission, make known to others what I have revealed to you that is impossible. She noted, and my heart shrank in terror from the thought. She even coveted death as release from her responsibilities. And this is when she found out that her mission is going to be for the world. It was just like we heard this morning with Jonah, except Ellen didn't run. But like some of the disciples, that thought did go, she did have that thought. Then she had a vision in which she saw a company of lost people who were in the very picture of despair and horror. They came close to me and took their garments and rubbed them on mine. Lo, look at my garments. I saw that they were stained with blood. Again the angel raised me up on my feet and said, this is not your case now, but this scene passed before you. Let you know that your situation must be if you neglect to declare to others what the Lord has revealed to you. But if you are faithful to the end, ye shall eat of the tree of life, which is similar to what Jonah went through. Now a little bit about her marriage. In 1845 and early 1846, James and Ellen had come to realize that the time before Christ's return would be longer than they had first realized, and that they had a special message to deliver. She could go by herself. She could not go by herself, and no male members of her family were available to accompany her. A temporary solution arose when a young minister by the name of James White agreed to travel with her and a female companion or two as her protector. That arrangement, however, left them open to criticism. Eventually, James told her, Ellen recalled, that he would have to go away and leave me with whomever I would, or we must be married. He said that something has got to be done, so we got married. That is very interesting how that came about. It was all about, what people are going to say because they're traveling together. And today, people don't even think about it. Life goes on. Ellen repeatedly counseled James to slow down, but he was an individual of tremendous talent and energy, and could never quite bring himself to do so. He had what we call today workaholic tendencies. And you know somebody like that? Work. Yeah. Between 865 and his death in 1881, he had 5 strokes, the first being the worst. That stroke and his inability to trust others, to slow down, or to delegate authority colored the remainder of his life. He firmly believed that his wife's messages came from God, but Mrs. White had some pretty straight words on his work habits. But like normal males, they resented their wives' counsel. James White was no exception. Yeah, you find out this marriage is more like what we go through every day. At times, she expressed those sentiments. James was in the East attending board sessions and camp meetings when his wife wrote in California on the life of Christ. He had repeatedly pressured her to come and work for him, but she felt that it was God's will for her to remain where she was. Should I come east? She unburdened herself to Lucinda. James' happiness might suddenly change to complaining and fretting. I am thoroughly disgusted with the state of things and do not mean to place myself where there is the least liability of this occurring. I cannot have confidence in James' judgment these days. I cannot have confidence in James' judgment in reference to my duty. He seems to want to dictate to me as though I was a child. Yeah, I could see that. Because when I grew up, seeing the picture of Mrs. White, I never saw a smile on her face. And some of the stuff I'm going to get to, you'll see a smile on her face. He would be satisfied if he had the entire control of me, soul and body, but this he cannot have. I sometimes think that he is really not a sane man, but I don't know. May God teach and lead and guide. So yeah, she had some feelings about her, things that we all go through. S.P.S. Edwards, An Adventist saw her as relatively stockily built, but not overly obese. Her features were round and full, her hair dark and always parted and combed back, simply to a braided knot in the back of her neck. She always looked at you straight in the face unless she was reading. That's a pretty good description. She attended public school in Maine, Portland, Maine, until she was 9 years old, and spent a short time in private school during her 12th year. At the age of 9, Ellen was hit in the face by a rock thrown by a classmate. She hovered near death for several weeks, but eventually recovered. But the injury left her unable to continue her schoolwork. It was the hardest struggle of my young life, she later wrote. Ellen and her twin sister, Leslie, were born as the youngest of 8 children in Gorham, Maine. Her father, a maker and seller of hats, moved to the family to Portland. Both her parents accepted the Millerite message and later became Seventh-day Adventists, and she had a good relationship the rest of her life, as far as we know, with them. The next here, we're going to talk about the characteristic of Mrs. White was the fact that she was tenacious and she did not give up easily. Closely related to the trait of perseverance was Ellen White's dedication to her work, family, and friends. This was illustrated when her husband had a severe paralytic stroke, August 16, 1865. One so severe that the doctors had never seen a severe case like this make a recovery. But Ellen White thought otherwise. For the next 18 months, she would fully dedicate herself to regaining James' health. And yeah, I could see that. Having no confidence in traditional medicine as they practice it, she first took James to her home on a hillside in Dansville, New York, a health reform institute operated by Dr. James Jackson. While Mrs. White agreed with many of the ideas presented by Dansville reformers, she took an exception to certain others that she claimed differed from the instructions she had received in vision. In particular, she disagreed with Jackson's counsel that individuals need to avoid all constructive thought and useful activity. In their place, he recommended things as amusing as dancing, card playing, and theater going. They even suggested that the reason James had become ill was that he was too intensely religious. Well, that could be true. She believed that an active faith in God, an active mind, and useful work is what James needed. My husband wanted to see no one. So I brought the visitor before him and would say, "Husband, here is a brother who has come to ask a question, and you can answer it much better than I can. I have brought him to you. Also, in many ways, I made him exercise his mind." Another tactic Ellen G. White used was physical exercise. He would say, "I cannot go out in such weather." "Oh, yes, you can," Ellen would say. "You can surely can step in my tracks." He was a man that had great respect for women, and when he saw my tracks, he thought that if a woman could walk in the snow, he could. That morning, he took his usual walk. Another time, she instructed Willie to buy 3 hoes and 3 rakes, and they went out and planted their spring garden. He ejected, but took one of the hoes, finally. Taking one myself, she recalled, we began to work, and although I blistered my hands, I led them in hoeing. Father could not do much, but he went through the motions. I know husbands that go through the motions in a lot of things. During the hay harvest, he stated that the 3 of them could not do the work themselves and show the neighbors. Willie and I will rake the hay and pitch the wagons, and if you will load it and drive the team. With that settled, James inquired how would they make the haystack. Ellen volunteered for the job if her husband would pitch the hay, and while Willie would be raking it for another load. Growing up on a farm, I could see that. Because I know my mom influenced my dad to work longer hours at times. After his recovery, my husband lived for a number of years, during which he did the best work of his life. Now there was an S.N. Haskell who had the distinction of being one of having more letters written to him by Ellen White than any other person outside of her immediate family. And beyond that, he was the only man to propose marriage to the widowed Ellen that we have record of. She refused on the grounds that it would be best, in light of her literary work, not to take another name and to continue the way she was working. Now, Ellen White was a mother. She was a mother of 4 boys. One boy died at 24 days old, and another died of pneumonia as a teenager. He was 16 years old. All these occurred within a 3-year period. And when you have a husband and wife that have 2 children that die, it is devastating to them, absolutely devastating. Of the other 2 sons, Willie and Edison, it was Edison that gave her problems. She wrote, "Oh, Edison, it is the knowledge of these things that was wearing me out and bringing upon me discouragement, which will compel me to cease laboring in the cause of God. You had so little sense of true value of character." 3 years later, she told him, "You seem at a distance from me as though my words were useless." He was not only deceptive and disobedient, but vain. And if you're a father or if you're a mother, and if you have a child like that, you can identify those things that she's talking about. For years, the family had been split, which means having to live the older children in the care of trusted church members for extended periods of time. Separation from her children was one of the greatest traumas of Ellen G. White's life. Many nights while they were sleeping, she had spent with bitter weeping. And that's in the first volume of the Testimonies. When out of provisions, James went through the streets of Brunswick, Maine, with a bag on his shoulder in which were a few beans and a little meal and rice and flour to keep us from starvation. When he entered into the house singing, "I am a pilgrim and I am a stranger," it's a hymn 444 in the hymnal, SDA hymnal, I said, "It has come to this," which reminds me when John talked about him coming up the aisle and always singing. Apparently James was always singing. And she says, "Has God forgotten us? Are we reduced to this?" He lifted his hand and said, "Hush," this is James, "the Lord has not forsaken us. He has given us for our present wants," in other words, for today. Jesus fared no better. I was so worn out after this that I fainted in a chair. Another time, showing that some of the work that she had to do, taking care of her family. Writing of patching James' overcoat in the late 1840s, for example, she noted that she even patched the patches, making it difficult to tell the original cloth on the sleeve. There were 4 boys eventually, it came down to 2, and they almost lost one of the other ones. Willie. In May of 1856, they very came close to losing 21-month-old Willie, who had been playing boat by pushing a stick of wood around a lake consisted in a large tub of mop water. So it was one of the little mop buckets. Not like we have today, I'm sure. Leaving him a few minutes to get some wood, she returned to find one foot sticking out of the water. She snatched out his apparently lifeless body and began to scream, "He's drowned, he's drowned." Ellen took the child's body, cut his clothes off, and began to roll him out in the front grass as the water pulled out of his mouth and nose. The neighbors began to gather in a frantic rolling, it's an old fashion of artificial respiration, went on for 15 minutes. They began to advise Ellen of her efforts were hopeless, and one woman said, "How dreadful to see her handling that dead child. Someone take that dead child away from her." James responded that it was her child, and she could roll him as long as she chose. Finally, at the end of 20 minutes, she saw faint signs of life. The preserving mother's love had paid off. You know, I would have loved to hear a story like that when I was young. One hot August morning, Sabbath afternoon at St. Helen, Ellen White noticed a ripple of suppressed laughter in the audience as she preached. Now we're getting to some more humorous things. Knowing that she had not made a humorous remark, she turned around to see what was amusing. When Willie was a baby, she noted, I had no babysitter, so I had a Battle Creek carpenter make me a little cradle on rocker arms, just exactly the width of the pulpit in the Battle Creek Tabernacle. I would place Willie in the cradle before the worship service began, and while I was preaching, I would, with my right foot, rock the cradle to keep him asleep. Willie was sleeping behind her then. That's why everybody was laughing. Keep him asleep, lest he awaken and disturb the service. So don't blame Willie, blame me. I'm the one who taught him to sleep in church on Sabbath. While the congregation enjoyed the hearty chuckle, Mrs. White got on with her sermon while Willie continued to sleep. That isn't the only time that Willie was sleeping. There was another time Willie was scheduled to have the closing prayer. The main speaker, wanting to make a point mid-sermon, exclaimed, Elder White, isn't that so? He turned around. The slumbering Willie, as his mother always called him, yeah, what a name to call your son, the slumbering Willie. Thinking it was time cue for prayer, jumped up to the speaking podium and promptly gave the benediction. That was a short sermon, and I have seen some sermons that should be shorter when I was younger. Ellen enjoyed a humorous side of life. Her daughter-in-law reports an incident that took place as a family returned from Australia to the United States in 1900. Their ship stopped at Samoa, and the little boat that took them from the ship to shore didn't make it all the way in. Since the women wore long dresses, the local men waited out to help them get ashore. The natives of Samoa, the daughter-in-law noted, were hefty fellows who didn't wear too many clothes. Uh-oh. Two of the men clasped their hands together, like this, on the other side, making a chair with their arms, and carried Mother White to the beach, where she sat on a large rock. Another man took my 4-month-old daughter in his arms and held an umbrella over her to shelter from the sun. Then he motioned for me to get on his back, so I scrambled onto his back, piggyback, and wrapped my arms and legs around him, and off we went. Mother White laughed so hard at the sight that she could not stop. She laughed until she fell off the rock. When I grew up, I could never see that. Mrs. McInfor, Mrs. White's companion and nurse in her later years, bought a dish of greens, which Mrs. White requested at nearly every meal because she thought they was good for elderly people. Mrs. McInfor set the personal dish before Sister White with a joking remark, "Here is your horse feed, Mother." I was horrified and was looking to see Ellen White's rebuke her in this levity, which, that's what I would think. She glanced quickly over the table, and with a humorous glint in her eyes, her mouth curved up slightly, she remarked, "I don't know if it's my horse food in this is any worse than your cow's peas." Ellen White's mealtime counsel seemed to infiltrate throughout her day. Her daughter-in-law noted that she could be hearty and was certainly entertaining. At another time, she was sent to they gave me, it was called a Hug Me Tight. It's a warm vest for cold days. She tried it on, and instead of going around the edges of her body, it just went around to their sides. So she told me to tell Sister Devaney that she had greatly appreciated the gift, but there was a great deal more to her than some people thought. At times, she made remarks about clothing. "Sisters, when you go to your work, you should not put on clothing which would make you look like the image to frighten the crows in the corn. Or when you're going to your granddaughter's, and she told her granddaughters not to dress as they were going to a funeral, or when the clothing of some tasteless individuals looks as if it flew and lit upon the persons. I never knew any of this about her at all. Ellen wrote to Edison that Father and I rode 6 miles on an Indian pony that we might get accustomed to riding. Their trip across the mountain past Middle Park took 4 days. Both the scenery and the growing ability handling her ponies expressed Ellen. I endured the horseback riding well, she reported, and on the second day, travel could have my pony lope. I think that's like a slow gallop, nicely. Stopping her pony, she was ready to slip from her stirrups when the pony was frightened and threw me back over his back. I struck my back in my head. I knew I was badly hurt, but I felt sure no bones were broken. It's in letter 14, 1872. However, the injuries was much worse, as the ligaments had been torn from her ankles, and she would endure ankle and hip problems for the duration of her life. Thus ended her extensive walking days. In later years, she would often rely on riding in buggies for her nature excursions. The inability to exercise extensively walking also undoubtedly contributed to her increasing weight as she moved in the Middle Ages and beyond. This incident did not dim her enthusiasm for the nature of the mountains. Beyond her feeling that she was not doing the right thing by going along with her husband's brainstorm of a trip, this is another trip, the party faced some real dangers. We have to be very well armed in passing through Indian territory. We have our wagons brought up in a circle. This sounds like a Western movie. Then our horses are placed within the circle. We have 2 men to watch. They are relieved every 2 hours. They carry guns on their shoulders. We have less fear from Indians than from white men who employ the Indians to make a stampede among the horses and mules and ponies. James, however, was having the time of his life. Yeah, James. Father rides horseback a considerable part of the time. He is enjoying the journey much. Ellen did not share the same spirit. I have been sick the entire journey. I have lost 12 pounds. I have no rest. Not a bit of it for poor Marion Davis. We have worked like slaves. We cook repeatedly half the night. Then she says, I have strayed against my judgment and wishes. I have consented to this long journey. And I never knew that Ellen G. White ever rode a horse before, or a pony. Never knew it. Here's another incident. Those who have difficult time imagining Ellen White horsepacking across mountain passes might find it equally hard to picture her exulting of a Pacific Ocean storm. One of the church members in San Francisco, owning a large sailboat, invited Mrs. White and several friends to join him on an excursion on San Francisco Bay and out into the Pacific Ocean. All seemed to enjoy the cruise on the bay, but the open ocean was a different matter. Ellen reported to her husband that the 2 daughters-in-law had become seasick, but that she had not. To the contrary, she was having a wonderful time. The waves ran high and were tossed up and down so very gradually. I was highly elevated in my feelings, but had no words to say to anyone. It was grand, the spray dashing over us, the wonderful captain giving orders, the ready hands to obey. I had never enjoyed anything so much in my life. One drive in 1904 in Washington, D.C. area, she had the privilege of encountering President Theodore Roosevelt. A few days ago, she wrote to Edison, Sister Hall, Sarah, and I went for a long drive in Rock Creek Park, the most beautiful place. I have seldom driven a finer roads. Here the president takes his rides. On a drive, we met the president. He bowed as we passed him. Taking the opposite position from Ellen White were those who seize the light in her testimony upon health reform and make it a test. Such individuals selected statements upon health reform to make it a test. Such individuals selected statements made in regard to some articles of diet that were presented as objectionable. Statements written in warning and instruction to certain individuals who had entered on an evil path. They dwelt on these things and make them as strong as possible, waiving their own particular objectionable traits of character in those statements and carrying them with great force, thus making them a test and driving them where they do not harm. And when I grew up, there was things that was made to appear to be a test. There was another time that she visited a maximum security prison, and dealing that I work in a prison. It's surprised to see how many young of them the prisoners are and how young they were. Her heart went out to them, and she wrote to her husband, I tried to imagine my youth around me as boys, to talk with them from a mother's heart of love and sympathy. There was another legal case that was brought to her by William Walling, the husband of her niece. Walling had urged Mrs. White while she was visiting in Colorado to take care of his children for a few months in 1873. Those months stretched into years, and Mrs. White reared and educated the girls as if they were her own. Walling, meanwhile, made no attempt for years at a time to contact his daughters, either in person or in mail. Then suddenly, after 18 years of neglect, when the girls had become young women, he wanted them to return to keep house for him. They chose quite naturally to stay with Aunt Ellen. At that point, he instituted a $25,000 lawsuit against Mrs. White. You know how much in 1873 $25,000 is? That's a lot of money. Litigation continued for about 4 years, with the mounting evidence favoring Ellen White. In spite of her favorable position, she decided to settle out of court, and the settlement was not a minor contract. She paid $2,000 to the attorney's fees and $1,500 to Mr. Walling. This is a lot of money considering they made $2 a day. But she did this for her love and sensibility to the feelings of her nieces. Her husband also had a bit of playfulness in him. On one occasion, James wrote to Willie that he had finally found time to take a bath. It was the first time in 24 days, and I was surprised to find my skin as white and clear and fresh as a baby. Reading through these things, and there's a couple more, there was one summer that Ellen and, my time's almost gone, that Ellen and James was separated. She was on the West Coast, he was on the East Coast. And there was it's hard when you find out that even though you're separated, that she wrote to him almost every day. She was a very dedicated wife. After reading this, I haven't talked to my sister, but after reading this book, I have came, just like in 1982 when I fell in love with Jesus, this book has allowed me to fall in love with Ellen White. If you want to get this book, it's called Walking with Ellen White by George Knight, and it's on Amazon. You can order it. I don't know how much it is. Shall we bow our heads for prayer? Heavenly Father, thank you for today's messages and for this beautiful Sabbath day that you have provided for us. And thank you for all the things that we have been blessed with when we see back in the 1800s that they had to do without. We are so much in a deficit for giving out a testimony that others have had before us. In your name, amen.